We do insurance my daughter on a company account, and she wrote that car off, paid out, and we were buying a new vehicle. I need to know who to speak to or who to email. Suzuki runs details. Yeah, I was going to ask you, can we rather just put this under my name?
Good morning, everyone.
Can you give it to me?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, we are ready to start. Unfortunately, our regulator member will be joining us very soon. I think due to people coming from far, let us start with a workshop on small-scale embedded generators. Okay. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I can see from the number of people the level of interest in this topic. And I hope we have a successful workshop, and I hope that we get out of the workshop, because our purpose for the workshop, in the main, is really to give clarity on certain issues regarding the process of registration and licensing. But before we do that, let me welcome the security manager from the hotel to tell us about evacuation procedures for the hotel. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everyone.
But before doing that, sorry, my name is Brancy Chotlo. I'm the acting executive manager, and this is Dennis Semena. He's the head of department, electricity licensing and compliance. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Philip. I will tell you where the evacuation point is and also the assembly point. If there's a line going off, it will tell you where to go. You go through door number 7, the one there on the corner there, and you will exit on the upper parking. And the assembly point is on the corner of Steve Beaker and Pretorius. The fire marshals will also come and attend if there's a fire or a bomb threat or anything in that case. But we haven't got a bomb threat in many, many years, so everything is in order. Any questions? Yeah. If you want to use the bathrooms, if you go on this side, down the passage, on the right hand side, the steps, you go down to the bathrooms for males and females. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I think maybe just to give context, to this workshop. Why are we having this workshop? It's because there's been a lot of confusion that we realized on the process that needs to be followed for the registration of 1 to 10 megawatts, and then the licensing of about 10 megawatts generators at the small scale. But also we need to give to the audience from Nersa's perspective who is eligible for this registration and for licensing of these generators. But also clarify other issues that we've actually also seen in the media and everywhere, and that will come during the question and answer session. Our presentations will be done mainly from the Dennis side, and we'll break each presentation. These presentations, we've got 3 of them, and after each one, we'll then open up the floor for questions and clarification. But we'll limit it to a certain time, and then at the end, we'll come back to those questions that may still be outstanding. The first presentation that we are going to have is on licensing, exemption, and registration notice. And then after that, as I said, we'll have questions and answers. And then we'll later, after tea, get to and its requirements. We hope, ladies and gentlemen, to finish by lunchtime, but yeah, given that it's a Friday, we might do it earlier than that, depending on your mood today. I don't want to waste time. I hope Dennis is ready. We are going to take the first presentation. It's on licensing, exemption, and registration notice. Dennis? Sorry, when you get to questions and answers, we are using the old model, the micros. So please do press the mic, and then just take it closer to your mouth. If you are sitting like Mbongiseni and Chris are sitting, please share the mics. Thank you very much. Okay, I've just been notified. Sorry, I've just been notified that this workshop is streaming and it's recorded. So whatever we say, the recording will be there, but it's it's live streaming workshop, just for your notification.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to, my name is Dennis Yamela. I'm the head of department, electricity, licensing, compliance, and dispute resolution. I'll do the first presentation. I'll be assisted by Mr. Mbongiseni Morati, who's our legal advisor. Okay. The first presentation deals with the current notice. Okay. The notice is the licensing, exemption, and registration notice. Okay. And it was gazetted on the 10th of November 2017. However, I must emphasize one point. Today we're not going to present nor discuss the amendment to the notice that was issued on the 10th of November 2017. Reason being that that particular notice is out for public participation process. The closing date is today, so we don't want to talk about that because that will be influencing in a way the comments that be coming our way. So that notice is not yet gazetted. Is still work in progress, so it's not under discussion today. What we'll be discussing today is the gazetted one, which is the legal one, which is the one that as Nersa currently we're using to register facilities. As my executive manager has said, there's going to be 3 presentations. The first one is just to share with you and to clarify with you, okay, the licensing and exemption notice that was gazetted on the 10th of November 2017, and then to also share with you who's eligible, for registration. That's the first presentation. Okay. The second presentation, we're going to discuss the registration process. It's going to be a very short presentation. It won't be long. Okay. It's like how do we go about registering facilities, generation facilities. The last presentation, it relates to the letter that Nersa received on the 2nd of May 2019. Is the letter from the then Minister of Energy, wherein in the letter it stipulates exemption to approval. Let me just put it this way. The minister actually gave an approval for all facilities above 1 megawatt up to 10 megawatt. Remember that for registration it's from above 0 to 1 megawatt. So for any generation facilities above 1 megawatt up to 10 megawatt, we received a letter to say that for those generation facilities, they have to apply to Nersa. When we receive the application has to go through the normal licensing process, and the normal licensing process include public participation process. So when I'm presenting, I'll try by all means to actually discuss the requirements firstly for registration, and I'll also discuss the processes that go, into registration. When I come to licensing as well, we actually share with you the licensing process. How do you go about, doing the licensing process and the timelines thereof. And I'll also discuss and share with you what are the requirements for one to apply for a license. And then, as my executive manager said, as soon as one presentation is completed, there will be a question and answer session. And to make sure that everything runs smoothly, I will prefer that I do the entire presentation. When I'm finished with the presentation, if you've got issues with some of the slides that I've gone through, you are more than welcome to ask me to go back to that particular slide. Then we can discuss or can ask me any question related to that particular slide. So what I'll do, firstly I'll present. When I finish, there'll be a question and answer session. If the question is of legal nature, my learned colleague, Mr. Mbonise Murati, who's a legal advisor, will actually assist me in responding to some of the questions. If need be, some of the colleagues here from Nersa or DOE, they could assist where possible if I'm unable to respond to the answer to your satisfaction. Sorry, it just changed.
We apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. We are ready to present. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'll repeat again. The objective of this presentation is just to clarify the licensing and registration notice that was issued or gazetted by the Department of Energy on the 10th of November 2017. We'll try by all means to clarify, the registration notice, and I'll also try to explain who's eligible for registration. Okay. This is the presentation outline. Okay. I'll start with the introduction, basically who's Nersa. I'll discuss the environment and the legal mandate within which we operate as Nersa. I'll discuss the old Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act. I'll also discuss the repeal of the Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act. And then thereafter, I will discuss the question, what does the notice address? Okay. Role of Nersa in its implementation, and lastly, there will be a conclusion. Nersa is a regulatory authority established as a juristic person in terms of Section 3 of the National Energy Regulator Act number 40 of 2004. Nersa's mandate is to regulate 3 industries: electricity, pipe gas, and petroleum. Nersa is a public entity as per the Public Finance Management Act, and therefore has to comply with the requirements of that particular act. And I need to discuss this so people can understand, the environment within which we operate as Nersa. Normally, right on top of the triangle, okay, the government, enact policies. I can give an example: the electricity pricing policy. They also enact the laws, the National Energy Regulator Act, the Electricity Regulation Act. Those are the examples of the laws that they enact, and amongst others. There is a Department of Minerals and Energy now, okay. That particular department, it issues regulation and notices. I can give an example of a regulation. There's a regulation on new generation capacity that was issued on 11th May 2011. Okay. The other one, they also issue notices. The licensing and exemption notice was gazetted by the Department of Energy. Now, at the bottom of the triangle is Nersa. We come up with rules. But before we do that, we have to go through the public participation process. In other way, we have to follow our processes as per the National Energy Regulator Act, right together with the PAJA. Okay. Now we do governance. Okay. So in terms of registration, the procedure, the forms and all that thing, they fall part of the rules. So what I want to emphasize about this particular slide is that as Nersa, we implement policy. And then when I say policy, we implement whatever comes from the government or comes from the Department of Energy, be it regulation or notices or whatever document that the department issues. I want to discuss this for people to understand. The Electricity Regulation Act has got a Schedule 2. That schedule, okay, it had 3 elements in it. So before the 10th of November 2017, that's what was applicable in terms of law. So in another way, before the Department of Energy Gazette, the licensing exemption and registration notice, what was applicable at that time was that those three categories, you were exempted to apply for and hold a license. In another way, if you have any generation facility that's constructed and operated for demonstration purposes and it's not connected to the grid, you didn't have to come to Nersa and apply. You can go ahead and do it. You didn't have to hold a license. So that means. The second one is any generation facility constructed and operated for own use. If you had a facility for own use, you didn't have to apply to Nersa. And you didn't have to hold a license. The last one is non-grid connected supply of electricity, except for commercial use. If it's non-grid, and then you're going to actually supply a particular community and it's for commercial use, then it doesn't apply. But if you do it, for instance, if it's a grant, and then you're not going to make any money out of it, it does happen in South Africa, especially deep in the rural areas where we don't have any electricity supply in that particular area. If it's not for commercial use, you didn't have to apply to Nersa, and then you didn't have to hold a license. However, there were issues with this particular schedule, especially the second one. Okay. Any generation plant constructed and operated for own use. Okay. The question was that, what is own use? Okay. For instance, if there's a generator and then there's a load or off-taker, and the off-taker has got shares in that particular generator, can the off-taker actually, for argument's sake, if the off-taker has got 20% shares and the generator has got 80%, or the owner of the generator 80%, can you say that's own use? Okay, there was a lot of debate regarding that. What really is own use? And then the other issue was that connection to the grid, okay, for own use. Because if it's connected to the grid, there are other requirements that are applicable, things like the grid code. Okay. There are other requirements that the network service provider may actually impose because you actually connected them to the grid. So there was a lot of interpretation regarding this, a lot of debate about it. And then the good thing about this particular schedule, this one is repealed, I must emphasize that point, was that there was no capacity limitation. In other words, for own use, you could build anything, regardless of any particular capacity of plant. There was no problem with that, as long as you can demonstrate that that particular generation facility is for own use. However, this particular schedule has been repealed, and then the repealing of the schedule was done by the minister, and then the minister is empowered in terms of section 36(4) of the Electricity Regulation Act to amend and repeal the schedule. And I think the minister does not require the concurrence of any person. If it was done under section 34, Nersa would have been expected to concur. But this one was done under section 36(4). The amendment or the notice, it becomes effective from the date that is gazetted. And that has created some bit of a problem as well, because it didn't give Nersa room to start, putting up mechanism in place to deal with the registration process. And legally speaking, Nersa is bound by that particular notice. Remember I said that, as Nersa we implement policy. So we're bound to implement it with immediate effect. And it required immediate implementation. However, We also have to ensure that we've got a regulatory mechanism in place to deal with any processes, be it registration or licensing. Reason being that we will try our means to be consistent, to be fair. So if we have a mechanism in place to deal with it, you can able to demonstrate even in the court of law to say that I've used this particular document for fairness and to be consistent to everybody else. The other thing that I have to emphasize, this is not a regulation. It's a notice. There's a difference. Okay. Now, I'm going to the details of the notice. What does the notice entails or incorporates? The first clause, it says that generating facility with an installed capacity. And I must emphasize this point, that this particular notice talks about installment. It talks about a situation where you find that you've got an industrial, as an example, you've got an industrial plant. You can have a generator within that industrial premises to supply that particular entity or industry. You don't have to wheel the power. Okay. However, because you need to have connection and use of system agreement with the network service provider. In this case, it's a distributor. And the generator as well. Okay. The reason being that you find that even if it's in that particular premises of an industry, the example that I gave, you find that it's connected or synchronized to the grid in most of the time. Okay, that's the reason why you need to have a connection and use of system agreement from the network service provider. The customer must be falling within a distribution licensed area. Well, I was saying this, that you should get approval from the distributor who's supplying that particular. If it's an industrial entity, as I gave an example, if it's supplied by ESCOM, you should get that connection and use of system agreement from ESCOM or any other municipality or private distributor. And here, we, from a legal point of view, understanding that the generator and customer is not the same person. And I must explain this. Okay. That means the generator must have its own legal entity, regardless of whether the off-taker must have its own legal entity, regardless of any shareholding that might be there between the generator and the customer. That's immaterial. But there must be a company, a registered company for the generator. And then if it's supplying a particular customer, that customer must have a legal identity as well. It shouldn't be the same. Clause 2.1 and 2.2 are exactly the same. It's a generation facility with an installed capacity of no more than 1 megawatt, which is connected to the grid. It's the same as the previous one. However, the conditions are different. Now, for this one, it supplies a single customer, just like the previous one. This one goes further to say that, or related customer, by wheeling through the grid. Remember the previous one, there was no wheeling. This one is wheeling through the grid. Okay. I can give you an example. The generator may be in Gauteng. The customer may be in Western Cape. So you have to wheel the power from Tshwane to Cape Town. Okay. And I'm emphasizing this point because the next one says the customer may be located separately from the generation facility. Remember what I said previously, the previous one, that if, for practical purposes, if there's no wheeling, obviously the customer must be close by to the generator. So this one, the customer may be far away or separate from the generator. Again, you need to have a connection and use of system agreement from the network service provider or the distributor who's supplying that particular area. Related customer is defined in terms of the Companies Act. If you go through the Companies Act, there's a whole lot of definition of a related customer. You're more than welcome to go there and check what that means. But our understanding of a related customer is that if you have a generator, it's 1 megawatt. You can have a couple of customers, but those customers, for instance, if you have 2 customers and the installed capacity of that generator is 1 megawatt, one customer may be taking 300, the other one could be taking 700 kilowatts. Okay. So they are related to the generator. The generator's installed capacity is limited to 1 megawatt. So, clause 2.3. Generation facility with an installed capacity of no more than 1 megawatt, not connected to the national grid, or having an interconnection agreement. This one now, it talks that it's operated solely to supply electricity to the owner of the generation facility. Now, it amplifies the own use, this one. Okay. The second one is operated solely to supply electricity to a customer related to the generator owner of the generation facility. You see, the issue of shareholding as well can come in here regardless of the quantum. Okay. Electricity supplied to a customer on the same property on which the generation facility is located. Okay. It's similar to clause 2.1. It's in the same premises. Another way, if I can give an example about a farm, you find that a farm has got different points of supply, and then the load of the farm is 8 megawatt. Okay. If you have a 1 megawatt generation facility connected to one of the points of supply, it's embedded inside that. What the distributor will see is that it's a net load at the end. That 8 megawatt, for practical purposes, 8 minus 1, the distributor will only see 7 megawatt. So that particular generation facility is within the premises of the farm. So that means this one, as an example. There is no connection of use of system, okay, for this particular one. However, I think I must emphasize as well that depending on the way, the reason for that as well to say, when you say that there is no connection of use of system agreement, it's not, I think, because if you look at the top part, it says connected, not connected to the national grid, and the other part is having an interconnected agreement. So it's 2 parts. There's one part where you don't need to have a connection in use of system agreement, but if it's connected, or having an interconnected agreement, for the second part you need a connection agreement. I should have emphasized that one. Okay. Clause 2.4. It talks about you need to have connection and use of system agreement. The facility should not be operated for demonstration purposes for more than 3 years. So there's a limit. However, the good thing with the demonstration purpose is that there's no threshold, there's no limit in terms of capacity. It's not there. 2.5, cogeneration facility produced from a co-product, byproduct, waste product, or residual industrial processes. First condition is operate solely to supply electricity to the owner of the generation facility. What that means is that if you have a cogen, it's typical of companies like SAPI. Even if you supply yourself with a cogen, you need to be registered. Okay. Or the second one is that if it's operated solely to supply electricity to a customer who's related to the generator owner of the facility, you need to be registered. So you can actually, the cogen can sell it to a customer. The electricity is supplied to a customer on the same property on which the generation facility is located. There is no capacity threshold on a generation facility. In other words, for cogeneration, the 1 megawatt limit doesn't apply in terms of installed capacity. And then the good thing as well, the customer may be co-located separately from the generator. Now it will be far away. The next clause is clause 2.6, which deals with backup generation or standby generation. This one is meant for provision of electricity during supply interruptions, like if you have load shedding or if you have an interruption problem because of a fault or whatever reason. The operation of the generation facility should not be longer than the interruption. You should use it during the time when there's an interruption. There is no capacity threshold. In a way, there's no limit in terms of installed capacity for backup or standby generation. The load should be having a supplier, basically. In another way, like they should be a supplier like municipality or ESCOM. Under normal circumstances, you only use this type of generation when there's an interruption. The presumption is that the load should be at the same location with the generator. In most cases, standby generators or backup generation are in the same premises. Clause 2.7 is continued operation of an existing and holding a license. The facility must still be in operation. We don't want to register facilities that are no longer working. Okay. And then remember, the old schedule didn't have a threshold. There was no limit in terms of installed capacity. The limit in terms of installed capacity for registration was introduced by this notice. The limit of 1 megawatt. The old one didn't. Clause 2.8 is a continued operation of an existing generation facility that were in operation prior to the notice being issued with a declared non-compliance and agreed with Nersa on the time frame to continue operation of an existing generation facility that were in operation. I'll give an example at the end. The generation facility should have been in operation prior to the notice. The facility must still be in operation. I'll give an example. The facility does not fall under the ambit of the notice. Prior to the notice possible. Okay. The facility must the time frame to comply with the notice is agreed on between the operator and Nersa. The facility may require, if it falls outside the scope of the notice, it may require licensing. Okay. Now, there are those facilities. If I recall, some of the distributors, they went around and checked some of the embedded generation and find that some of them were not safe. They disconnected them. Okay. But if you could go there and make sure that you comply with the safety requirements, this is just an example. You're more than welcome to come to Nersa and register a facility. Or if for some reason you realize that your generation facility doesn't comply in another way, you're more than welcome to discuss the matter with Nersa, and then we are agreed on the time frame that you can bring the operation into compliance. Clause 2.9 is operation of a distribution connection that's connected to a generation facility. This is just a connection line, okay, between the generator and the customer. And then it's used specifically for wheeling electricity exclusively from a registered generation facility. It could be a licensed one. I purposefully put registered facility. You can have it there if you have a licensed generation facility as well. It's not only restricted to the registered facility. And for wheeling exclusively from a registered facility to a point of connection. It may not be supplying a customer, it might just be a point of connection. From one point to the other. For instance, if you've got two factories, to give an example, it means your factory, you can have a distribution connection between your two factories. With that particular distribution connection, you should actually allow third-party access. Another way, if you have that distribution facility, there's a community nearby, and they want to get a supply from that distribution connection, if it has capacity, obviously you have to supply that particular community. There will be agreement in place how to deal with it. Of electricity. By resale of electricity, you find that it's very common in the urban areas and within secondary municipalities. You find that you've got flats, and then the flat is taking a bulk supply. Someone else is a reseller within the whole flat. Around Gauteng as well, a lot of complexes. You find that the supplier stops at a bulk point, and someone can take that particular bulk point and reticulate it to various houses within that particular complex. Now, that particular entity normally charges prices that are different. We've already picked up that as Nersa, okay, that are different from the supplier. So when you talk about reselling, we're talking about that. So the notice now deals with reselling of electricity. What it says is that for the reseller, the tariff or price charge to the customer should not exceed that charged by the network service provider. It should be the same as the distributor. The customer must be falling within the licensed area, within the network service provider's area of supply. The reseller must enter into an agreement with the distributor. Most of the time it's through an LP supply agreement in most of the time. There could be other agreements. There is no capacity threshold for a reseller. It's not there. The reselling will only apply to a place where there's already a distributor. We're saying this to emphasize the fact that there's a price cap. The price cap is what is being charged by the distributor. The general condition of service delivery must have been approved by the energy regulator. Another way, if you are going to take supply from a particular bulk point, you are going to supply the residents within that particular complex. That service delivery agreement, the condition thereof, should be approved by NES. That's what it means. Okay. To ensure that, remember NESA is to set the tariffs. To ensure that the tariffs that are going to be applied to that particular community or residents within that complex, the tariff that's set doesn't exceed the one that's set is charged by the distributor. Now, that was the notice as we understand it as NESA, after I discussed with the colleagues at NESA. Now, how do we implement it? We must have a procedure. We cannot just work like, without any direction or guidance. We must have a procedure. We're talking about a registration procedure that will guide how to go about registering generation facilities with a capacity of no more than 1 megawatt. It should be a registration form. We should determine the fees as well. That's according to the law, the Electricity Regulation Act, specifically section 9.2, that the registration application must be accompanied by a registration fee. It's once off. And I must emphasize that for a registered facility, you're not expected to pay for license fees. For those generation facilities that are licensed already, they pay an annual license fee to Nersa. And then the rate at which they are charged is actually promulgated by the minister annually. So once in operation, there's a licensing fee that each licensed generator is to pay. For registration, you're not expected, or the generation facility is not expected to pay any licensing fee. You pay the registration fee once off on application. The registered persons or person must comply with the Electricity Regulation Act. This is for compliance purposes. And I must emphasize this point that Nersa does not have an option not to implement the notice. It's a legal document. We have to. It's a must. We must implement that notice up until it's repealed. Then we'll implement the next one. This last slide, just want to conclude. The notice did not only deal with amendment of the schedule, but how the repealed schedule should be done under the Electricity Regulation Act. Let me try to clarify this point further. If you recall the old Schedule 2, 1, it talks about demonstration plants not connected to the grid, should be exempted. 2, own use. 3, non-grid, not connected to the grid. Now, if you look at the registration notice, somehow you start even introducing bilaterals because you can sell to a customer. So that notice went further. And you must understand that if you look at the name of the notice, it says licensing exemption, that's one part, and registration. So it includes even other things that it went beyond the old Schedule 2. However, it puts a limit in terms of the own use. The own use and the old schedule, there was no limit on the installed capacity. Now, it puts a limit of 1 megawatt in terms of installed capacity. All previously registered facilities should be registered with Nersa, whereas they can be excluded from the notice. Facilities like, give an example, Mall of Africa. Okay, we gave them a confirmatory letter to say that, they don't have to apply to Nersa, hold the license. We didn't have to do that because they didn't have to come to us, but they did. Okay, but now that facility needs to be registered. I've discussed the second point about the fact that this notice also encourages bilaterals with the customer or related customers. The old schedule didn't have that. And then now, resellers are under our spotlight now. Before they were not, and to be honest, Nersa received lots of disputes regarding resellers because the price they were charging was too excessive in comparison with the price that the distributor was charging. And what happened at the end is that, the residents within those complexes lost dispute with Nersa. It was a bit difficult for us as well to deal with those type of disputes because the resellers were not under our radar, but now they are. I must say that, when I'm going to share the registration procedure, the part of reselling will be done separately because we believe it's a different animal altogether. It needs to have its own procedure. It's different from, remember, reselling, the registration of a generation facility and reselling are two different things. So we need to have a procedure on how to deal with reselling of electricity. And then we are working on that. And then as soon as it's finalized and approved by the energy regulator, it will be put on our website for anyone to use for reselling of electricity. That was my last slide. I thank you. And now it's time for questions and answer session.
Thank you, Mr. Semela. I'm glad that you had that slide on the one with the pyramid. The one that shows who's responsible for policy, who's responsible for legislation, who's responsible for the rules and all of that. I'm glad you did that, except for one thing, Mr. Semela, that you need to update that slide. You have a Department of Minerals and Energy. You don't have a Department of Energy. Yeah, colleagues, we'll take questions. Mr. Murati, I don't know if you mind. You can come and take my chair. I'll stand up so that you can also assist Dennis in taking the questions. I think we'll take 3 at a time, so that we don't confuse the respondents. I see you, and then I see you, Chris. I see you there, the bed. It's City Power. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let's take you, Camilla.
Chair, Mr. Semela spoke about a registration process, and he spoke about requiring registered generators to comply with legislation. My question to you is, who will enforce that in compliance? Will it be Nersa? 2, if there's once-off registration, how would you know at any given point how many generators are registered on the network, specifically from a planning perspective? And 3, what is the process of deregistration? Remember, a network has a number of customers connected to it. One generator can affect another customer. For network security purposes, how would we get a generator deregistered if it's not complying with the rules and regulations? Thank you.
Good morning, Chris Yelland, EE Publishers. Can you explain whether a battery storage plant will need to be registered and or licensed, and what size limits these would be for such registration and license? Is it considered to be a generator, and is it subject to these notices? Thank you.
Let's take a cue from Chris. Just state your name and the company working for, organization working for.
Thanks, Chair. It's Paul Vermeulen from City Power Joburg. Just a point of clarity, if Dennis can just help us with that single customer generation. Can the customer be the owner of the generating plant? I was a bit confused. Must the two be separate entities? If you can clarify that. The second question was on backup generation, that you can only use it during an interruption. If you invest in an energy storage system, you're going to use it for arbitrage. Does energy storage or batteries fit in here? It doesn't seem to. In terms of continued operation of existing sites, we've got 125 customers that we believe we've properly commissioned can we register on their behalf? We've got all the information required. Can we do that on the customer's behalf, and will there be costs involved there? And the last question, distribution cables. Are these permitted to go across urban boundaries? What are the limits of that? Because we've got a grid that connects properties together, and we would much prefer customers that want to transfer energy from one property to another to in fact use our grid rather than start putting private cables between properties. Thank you.
Mr. Moratti will assist me where possible. I'll start with the question coming from ESCOM. Okay. Regarding the registration process. Who will enforce compliance? When we issue a registration certificate, the registration certificate is issued with license, with registration conditions. Now, the fact that, and those registration conditions, I must say that, they're not as stringent as the one for licensing. We try by all means to simplify them, okay, to suit the purpose of registration. So compliance will be undertaken by Nersa. Okay. The next one is how many generators are there in the network? To be honest, for now, we don't. I'll give you an example, Kamita. The city of Cape Town, they went out, and they even used a helicopter, trying to identify all embedded generation within their areas of supply. I must say as well that, ESCOM as well, at one point in time in some other areas, you went around and checked some of these embedded generators, and you found that some of them were not safe. You disconnected them. Okay. So for those facilities that are already in operation, will definitely require the assistance of the distributor as Nersa. And your cooperation will be highly, highly appreciated. We don't have the capacity or resources to go around in the country looking for all the embedded generation in the country. That would be a nightmare. However, the distributor may assist. ESCOM, you've already started. City of Cape Town, they've already started. Okay, the City of Cape Town even went to an extent of actually advertising on their website to say that, if you have a generator out there that we don't know, you're welcome to come and inform us about it. So we'll expect the distributor to assist Nersa in this regard. The next one is a very good question coming. But I want to answer it in two ways. You're talking about deregistering of generation facilities that don't comply with the law. Okay, but here, for those facilities that are already in operation, that don't comply with the law, safety is not negotiable. You are more than welcome to disconnect that particular generation facility and to inform the owner of the generation facility to liaise with Nersa or to discuss with Nersa to make sure and to inform that particular generator what is it that will actually make you as a distributor connect and grant that particular generator connection and use of system agreement. The court in this time, or most of the work in terms of compliance, doesn't sit with Nersa. It sits with the distributor. However, the other part coming now that we've got a notice and we're registering facilities, when I discuss the process, you will see clearly that the network service provider, in this case the distributor, has to grant approval first. That's my next presentation. Now, once you've granted approval to us as Nersa, well, assuming that it's complying with all your agreed requirements. So there's no issue of the registering unless if the embedded generator doesn't want to continue with the business of generating. Mr. Moratti, do you want to add anything to this?
I think you have touched on one of the issues that are very pertinent to the deregistration. Maybe the beginning part of it is that prior to the application being made to the regulator, there would have been an engagement between the distributor or the network service provider, because these connections are not necessarily going to be in a distribution licensed area. Some of them will be halfway outside of the boundary of the licensed area. So that's why we make reference to the network service provider, which means that that facility might have been connected to, it's a farm. A farm, we don't license farms. We only license a supply area. So if this generation facility is at a farm, that is where we make reference to the network service provider. That discussion, the engagement between the NSP and the generator, if they do not agree, because that is one of the requirements that we will need, if they do not agree, we'll have difficulty in approving the registration. So the process of monitoring the compliance issue, we'll monitor from the governance and the regulatory side of issues. But the NSP or the licensed distributor will monitor the compliance to the agreements that they've entered into with the generator. So the issue of deregistration cannot only be one-sided on the side of the regulator, it's also on the side of the licensed distributor or the network service provider. The other part that probably Dennis will also add on, the issue that Chris has raised, the battery storage, the difference that, or the content of the notice, it doesn't specify the technology that will be used to generate. It only talks about the capacity. And the capacity that the notice makes, it doesn't have the minimum threshold. So it will start on a 0.01, or whatever the number, how it starts, until 1 megawatt. Therefore, if the battery storage is used for the activities that the notice talks to, it will have to comply with the notice, which Dennis probably can add on that.
I think the other question that Chris asked is that, is it considered to be a generator? Okay. I think that debate we already had. Nersa, internally we debated it, and we also engaged the Department of Energy. It was agreed ultimately that, you know what, we may as well treat it as a generator, but it's a different type of a generation facility. It's not a normal generator where you generate and you put electrons to the grid or produce electrons at the end. It does, but in a unique way. Okay. How to deal with that? Okay, if it falls within the notice, as Mr. Marate said, it has to be registered. If it falls outside and is above 1 megawatt to 10 megawatt, obviously it will have to comply with the deviation letter that we got from the minister. But I must emphasize something else. Battery storage is new in the country. We need to get a standard. We need to get our grid code to deal with battery storage. And as I'm speaking, the grid code is looking at that. As I'm speaking, the NRS Association, which deals with the standards, is looking at that. So it's something that's new in the country. And then for now, okay, we'll either have to register or license it. You know, if it's above 10 megawatt, you may have to go then request for approval to deviate from the integrated resource plan. Now, coming back to the city power question. Single customer and owner of the generation facility. And assuming specifically talking about clause, I think it's 2.1 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. 2.1 and clause 2.2. Okay. The way I understand your question is that, the single customer, can the customer be the owner of the generation facility? If the customer is the 100% owner of the generation facility, it doesn't fall under this category, it's own use. It falls under, if it's 100%. If the customer owns 100% generation facility, it falls under own use. So it will fall under 2.5. 2.5. Let's go generation. It falls under 2.3. However, if the customer has got shares in the generator, and I mentioned it, the best thing is for both entities, especially if there's trading between two parties. For the generator to have its own legal entity, regardless of the shares that the customer has in the generator. That's best to deal with it like that. I hope I've responded to that. The issue of battery storage, I've already discussed it. The next one is the distribution cables. You're saying that you only encourage private connection facilities, but sometimes it does happen that the distributor is not in a position to do it for whatever reason. Now, if you are not in a position to do it, and someone else wants to do it, they should go ahead and do it. You can't deny them from that right. The last question that you ask is about customers, and then the way I understand your question, unless if I'm missing it, is that you've got customers who've got generators already, and then the question is that, can you register as a distributor or network service provider? Can you register those facilities on their behalf? The answer is no. The best that you can do is to advise those customers with generation facilities to apply to Nersa. Your role as a distributor is to grant those generation facilities that the customers have with connection and use of system agreement. So the best thing that you can do is to advise them to say, please go there and register with the National Energy Regulator. I think I've covered all of them.
Thank you. Maybe just as an emphasis to the last question. Remember, we are registering a generator, not a group of generators. So the generator must be recognized on their own and be generating and registered on their own. So I think what Dennis is saying is right in that we cannot have maybe, if you want to do that, you can actually have to do a registration for each one of them on their own without actually bringing them as a group. Can we have a next round of questions? I see you. I see you there and there. I'll take those. Maybe let me take you because you're there. Shelley, I'll come to you in the next round. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Bertie Stradom, IDC. I just want to clarify on storage. If you got a PV installation linked to storage, does the combined install capacity be determined from the PV plus the storage, or only the one maximum release capacity?
David Nichols, private citizen. There's talk of the agreement between the network service provider and the small embedded generation system. Will that agreement allow for the recovery of costs for the ancillary services and capacity charge?
Thank you. It's Chipamiendi from the DBSA. I think you kept on emphasizing that this is a notice and it's not a regulation. So I just wanted to understand what is the difference between it being a notice and not being a regulation.
There was a final one there. There was a final hand somewhere there. Oh, here, okay.
Just a question on, you said this that will be live streamed. Do you have the link and the address for this?
Yeah, IT, please assist us so that we
Okay, on the Twitter, if you go to Nersa_ZA, you'll also find the link for YouTube.
Thanks for that. Actually, I wanted to find it myself. I couldn't. So, thanks for that. That was not a question for you. It's been addressed. Can you address those three?
Yeah, I'll deal with that. Okay, let me try to be practical. Let's use an example of a PV. You've got a generation facility. Let's say the installed capacity is 1 megawatt. You've got battery storage. The battery storage, during the time when the sun is out and the sun is available, what will be happening is that your battery will be acting as a load. Okay, in other way, because it will be charging during that time. So you can't talk about combining generation. At that time it's a load. You know, when the PV plant is fully operational, or the sun is there. Now, the sun is not there, it's at night. The generator is off. Now what comes in is a battery. Now, if you look at that, I mean, it will make sense for you, if you want to have a battery storage, to make sure that you maintain the 1 megawatt installed capacity. That means if the sun is there during the day, the generation facility will be operating at 1 megawatt. So you are still within the limit of the registration. At night, when the sun is no longer there, your battery storage is 1 megawatt. So it's not a problem. So there's no issue regarding that. Now, the second part, you know, recovery, auxiliary services and all that. This notice doesn't deal with the financial part, unfortunately. It deals with the registration of facilities. However, if the registered facility is going to be a bilateral to a particular customer, you know, we may have to look at the financial side of things. We may have to look at the tariffs, but that will deal with it on application. We'll deal it on its merit at the time of application. The last one, let my legal colleague, Mr. Morati, explain this one. What's the difference between a regulation and an office?
The easiest part of explaining it is that this notice arises from section 36(4) of the Electricity Regulation Act that empowers the minister to amend Schedule 2. When the schedule is amended, it's read as schedule. This is the new schedule of the Act. And when you look at the heading of it, it says Schedule 2. So when we make reference to Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act, this is the new schedule. Whereas regulations are provided for under Section 35 in terms of what is it that the minister can do in developing regulations. So the regulations are actually identified and specified what is it that which regulations can the minister develop, and this doesn't form part of it.
Did you get that one?
Let me try to give you an example. I think Bonifin came up with. I just want to be practical.
Some people are legal too much. And it's just
okay, Bonifin explain this notice very well. This one is substitute Schedule 2. Basically, Schedule 2 is no longer there, substitute. A regulation, let's take for instance, a regulation on new generation capacity. That, what it does, it amplifies certain sections that are in the Electricity Regulation Act. It amplifies the powers that the minister has. Like for instance, it talks about the fact that the ministers responsible for capacity in the country, the technology, who the buyer is, whatever, you can go through it. So it's not actually a substitute of the act. So that's where the difference is, if I may give examples about that.
Okay, we'll take the last round, starting with Shirley, and then I'll take all 3, 4 of you. I'll take all of these because now after this round we're going to team. Shirley, yourself, and then yourself. Like the way you raised your hands.
Thank you, Brian. It's actually linked to the question that Paul asked around people building their own networks to connect two properties, let's say, where you actually said if the distributor can't do the connection, then the parties can do it themselves. The question I have is, would those parties now require a distribution license? Because they would be now reticulating between properties.
Next one was yeah.
Good day. Questions to the panelists on the registration process. The name is Seelan Pillay from IEast Energy. The registration process that Nersa is going to follow, is it an administrative process, or under which circumstances will Nersa refuse a generator to be registered on the system?
Okay. There were 2 hands here. We'll start from that side and this side, and then from there last.
Okay, Philipp Wanicek from GIZ, German Development Corporation. A short comment on the batteries. I think it's not as easy as to say the battery is a load during the day, because if they are AC coupled with the PV system, you actually could combine them and you could have the whole installed capacity on the grid. So I think there's more technicalities to that. But the question, you emphasized that you were a bit surprised or unprepared when the notice came out, but in February 25, 2015, you issued a consultation paper on small-scale embedded generation regulatory rules that dealt with at least a part of that, including to some extent registration. What happened with that process ever since? Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning, my name is Janella Wagner from Senani Energy. I just wanted to look at, considering the stability issues that solar has at about 4 o'clock when the sun starts going down, with overall ESCOM network stability, are we going to look at any kind of limitation to small-scale embedded generation?
Camilla?
My question relates to the slide you have on, and it's for your legal person as well. The issue around related customer, if you read the Companies Act, related could be a husband and wife, it could be someone in another company with a controlling interest, and it could be a trust. Now, we all assume non-grid is a rural network, but it's not necessarily the case. You could have non-grid in an area where a distributor plans to build a network. How will this be controlled? That you're limited to rural areas and not where distributors, whether it's a Munich or ESCOM, is going to be building a network in future.
Gentlemen, before you know, I hear a lot of questions around battery storage, and I need to just make a point that even ourselves here at Nersa, and I think in the country and outside of the country, this is a new technology, and we might not have all the answers to that. So we'll give what we can, and then we're still making our own assessments and research on those, and then maybe later we can bring something out of it. So I'm not limiting the questions on that. If you want to raise a question and we cannot answer it, we'll just tell you like that. Gibbs, I said I wanted this to be the last one, but I saw you, and I'll give you as a friend.
Thanks, Brian. Vernon Gibbs from ESCOM. My question is related to the resellers. Dennis, you indicated that licensees should enter into service delivery agreements with the resellers. Will this now replace the current guidelines, and then what are the timelines in terms of when should we as licensees submit this to the regulator for approval? Thanks.
Let's do it quickly.
Okay,
break is very soon.
You know what, Shelley, I think the last part of your question is very simple. Okay. Does it need to be licensed? No. The note is very clear. It says distribution connection facilities needs to be registered. Simple. Full stop. Not licensed. Okay. And then
sorry, just to clarify what she is saying. She is talking about the question as a follow-up. I think it was Paul's question. That we've got a customer here in Pretoria City, and then you've got another customer in Centurion, but the licensee is not able to connect them, and then this customer, this new generator, and the customer, they build their own line. So will that line qualify as a distribution line, such that that line then needs to be licensed as a distributor?
Monisen will help me. You know, as Nersa, I think during the when we were licensing the renewable energy projects from the Department of Energy, we also license, you know, distribution connection facilities. Okay. And then, however, the notice now addresses the fact that, you know, all connection facilities needs to be registered instead of licensed. One thing, maybe you should tell us.
As Dennis is highlighting, we had a situation where when we were licensing the IPPs, there were IPPs that were a distance away from the connection point. And the issue that came up was they wanted to build the line to connect to a point of connection. And we had a challenge that that distribution line falls outside of the property where the generation facility is at. Then we needed to have, we couldn't leave that part as an unregulated connection because of the challenges that it poses. And we came up with the concept of distribution connection facility, meaning that it's only taking connection from the generation facility to the point of connection, not supplying to the customer. That was when we were dealing with the IPPs. So there was no customer in the middle that is connected to that facility. The notice came up and specified, created two situations. One is the position that we had taken regarding connecting the generation facility to the grid. That becomes a distribution facility. The second one, if you look at the notice, there are parts where there are customers that are being supplied, but there's no grid connection. That would be the event where the generator has built a distribution facility to connect that customer. So in terms of the notice, that connection facility or that distribution facility that is referred there is the one that is exempted from holding a license. Under our regime at the time we're doing the IPPs, we licensed the facility. So under the notice, those facilities are no longer supposed to be licensed. They are supposed to be registered. That is where the difference is between the process that as the regulator we were following and what now the notice invents as the new process.
Okay, Mr. Pile, a quick one on this one. The registration process is an administration process. Okay. We try by all means to shorten it as much as we can to make sure that it doesn't follow the full 2% program that's involved in terms of licensing. For instance, for registration, you don't have to advertise and go through a public participation process, which is applicable to licensing. But we'll discuss that further when I present the registration process and when I present the licensing process. The question is, like, can you refuse a registered facility? The answer is yes. But in my next presentation, I'll actually, when I'm talking about the approval process, because the first approval is with the network service provider. The second approval is with Nersa. Nersa, all we do is to check compliance with legal requirements and regulatory requirements. So if you don't comply, If you have a problem in getting a connection and use of system agreement, there's no way that will register you. Even if you've got a connection and use of system agreement, if from a regular point of view you don't meet the requirements, you can't register you. So, the number 3, I'm happy with what my boss said, okay, regarding regarding battery storage. You know what? This is a new technology. Okay. If there's a situation where the battery and the generation facility combine, we'll have to look at the combine because the limit is the install capacity. So the battery and the generation facility, the install capacity should exceed 1 megawatt for it to fall within the notice. Now the other question is like what happened to a document that we issued in February 2015. We went out on a public passage process, rules on small-scale embedded generation. We received lots of comments. Okay. However, the way we're doing it at that time is different from what the notice says. At that time, we're saying that the registration will be done by the network service provider or distributor. And annually, the distributor will actually submit a list of all registered facilities. So it was a bit different. The reason why we didn't continue with it is that what happened? If you look at the triangle, the one that I presented, the Department of Minerals and Energy is supposed to come up with a notice or regulation before it can come up with rules. So we came up with the rules. There was no regulation, there was no notice. So the Department of Energy made us aware that, guys, we are coming up with rules, but there's no regulation to actually support your rules. So we received lots of comments, and then in my next presentation, the comments that we received at that time, they were used extensively in the drafting of the registration procedure. We received good inputs at that time.
But just conclude that was withdrawn.
Yeah, the process was withdrawn.
Yeah, just conclude so that we are aware that that process is no more.
It's no more.
It's no more. But the comment, we didn't destroy the comment. We still have the comment. But the process, because we had actually gone and did something before we got our principals to direct us, then we withdrew that part. So just.
The next one is coming from Kamita in terms of the limit on small-scale embedded generation. You know what? This is technology-driven, Kamita. And then for those facilities that are no more than 1 megawatt, there's no limit. The intention is that let everything happen out there. But once those facilities are registered, whatever, as Nersa, we should actually keep tabs of it. In a way, like we should be able to know how much embedded generation is there. That will serve as an input into the next review of the RP. Say there's no limit for those that. However, for the next one on the licensing above 1 megawatt to 10 megawatt, there's a limit, but I'll discuss that when I'm presenting.
I think it's just to emphasize, I think what she's saying is actually the danger, and I think it was presented at one of the regional meetings that we had. There's a concept called the dark thing, where during the day you've got a lot of sun, and then from there the generators go down, and then at 4 o'clock the sun goes out, and then it's got a dark shape, something like that. And it's a challenge not only for us, but as we do this, obviously we'll be looking at the shape of that dark and try to manage it as far as we can. But obviously, as Dennis is saying, technology is there, and it's happening, and the notice is there. But obviously, it has to go into the discussions around IRP, the planning processes, and how we also register these technologies. But I understand the point you are raising.
Mr. Murat will assist me with this one. Okay. Related customers in terms of the company sector.
The issue of related customers, I'll be very honest that we had a variety of challenges in that it appears a lot in the whole notice. And somewhere it talks about related customers where there's no grid connection. At some point it talks about related customers in a where there's connection. And you also find it when you deal with where the generator, it's solely just for generation, but the funders or the shareholders are spread all over the country. The amount of work that may need to be done to supply those related customers, that you might have to conclude the connection agreements with a lot of network service providers. As Dennis earlier on when he was presenting, he made an example of where the generation facility might be in Gauteng and the load, or one of the related customers in Western Cape, and the other one is in KwaZulu-Natal. For you to have those customers supplied linked to the generation facility, you might have a lot of work that may need to be done. And we tried to find ways of, we don't license a customer. So the issue that will come up is the customer might not necessarily be, it might be a reference point that when the generator comes to apply for registration, it will only cause, he has to identify the load. It will only highlight that I'm supplying not a customer, I'm supplying a related customer, because the notice makes reference of those two. You have a customer and a related customer, which is linked by the company's end. So for us, it will be more of the facility that needs to be registered to identify the customers. Obviously, with the ordinary customer, you would have a supply agreement provided. With the related customer, it will be the supply agreement plus the shareholding documents that they will need to provide to us. But Dennis will touch on those issues because they form part of the process of registration. What is it that we would require to deal with registration?
Okay, there's two last questions that came through. The other one is like, a non-grid generator may not necessarily be in the rural areas, it could be even in the urban areas, okay? But you know what, if it's a licensed area and it's within a particular distributor's licensed area, obviously there should be an engagement between the generator and the network service provider prior to Nersa registering it. The last question is going to do with reselling. I must emphasize that the service delivery agreement that has to be approved by Nersa is different from the L2 supply agreement. Maybe I didn't emphasize that point well. Yeah. Let me give an example. If you have a reseller at the bulk point, there will be an L2 supply agreement between the reseller and the distributor or the network service provider. However, the reseller might take this bulk point, reticulate it inside, and resell it, within a complex. Now, the service delivery agreement talks about beyond or after the bulk point. That's the agreement that has to be approved by Nersa. Remember, as Nersa, we have to approve the tariff as well, which is our responsibility. So that service delivery agreement will include the tariff that the reseller will be charging to the residents. That's a document that Nersa has to approve. So it's a different document altogether from the supply agreement.
Okay. Colleagues, thank you. Thank you. We'll take a break and then obviously whilst there's going to be the other presentations, at the end of it all we might still have questions around this one. So I'll stop it here. It's now, according to my new watch, it's 10 past 11. We were supposed to break at 11, but I suggest we still come back at 11. I suggest we do that, a quick one, so that we have sufficient discussions afterwards.
So anyone around the country, you can't write that you are not talking to them.
It's now scheduled to. It's scheduled to. And the one that is there in the unit. It is already been replaced. From 10 November 2017. Okay. It's applicable.
So everyone can take the
You can delete those pages and you can delete them.
I work with not to
Yeah, I used to work with